with General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 11, to fill a vacancy in the school committee until the next annual town election. Section 11 requires that the remaining members of the school committee and the members of the select board meet in joint convention to fill that current school committee vacancy. We have several members who have applied to be interviewed for the position, and we will be doing that shortly. They will each deliver an opening statement of approximately 3 minutes, and members of the school committee and the select board will be able to ask follow-up questions. Before we get to that, however, we need to first appoint a clerk of the convention, and after appointing a clerk of the convention, we need to then appoint a chair of the convention. Now, when we did this the last time, we had appointed Robin Coyne, the executive assistant of the school committee, to serve in that capacity of clerk of the convention. But technically, we could nominate anyone. Someone could second that nomination, and then we would have 2 votes. 1 vote to close nominations for clerk of the convention, and then a subsequent vote to, in fact, ratify who that clerk of the convention will be. So would anyone like to make a nomination for clerk of the convention? Ms. Monopoly.
I would like to nominate Robin Coyne to be clerk of the convention.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Do we have any further nominations for clerk of the convention? Seeing none, do we have a motion to close nominations for clerk of the convention?
So moved.
Okay, and do we have a second?
I second.
Ms. Monopoly seconds. Okay, Dr. Liu,
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff,
Yes.
Ms. Charlepsky,
Yes.
Mr. Ehrenberg.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, it's Dr. Ehrenberg, right? Dr. Ehrenberg. Okay, yes. And
Still yes.
Ms. Nobrega.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right, and now to the select board. Ms. Ashkenazi.
Dr. Ashkenazi.
Dr.
I would be remiss if I did not make that correction to my gender. Yes.
Ms. Hamilton.
Yes.
Dr. Fernandez.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Attorney Green, yes.
Tony Green, yes. And Mr. Van Swyk.
Yes.
All right, so we have now closed the nominations. And now we can proceed with actually naming Ms. Coyne to serve as clerk of the convention with another vote. So do we have a motion to appoint Ms. Coyne? Dr. Ehrenberg moves it. Do we have a second? Dr. Fernandez.
Second.
All right, so here we go again. Dr. Liu,
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff,
Yes.
Ms. Charlepsky,
Yes.
Dr. Ehrenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Nobrega,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. Dr. Ashkenazi,
Yes.
Ms. Hamilton,
Yes.
Dr. Fernandez,
Yes.
Attorney Green,
Yes.
Mr. Van Scoyac.
Yes.
All right, congratulations, Ms. Coyne. Now you are the clerk of the convention. Now next we need to decide on a chair for the joint convention. Are there any nominations for chair?
I'll nominate David Perlman for chair.
Second.
Okay, so Ms. Hamilton moves it and Dr. Ashkenazi seconds. Are there any other nominations for chair? All right, seeing none, we will now vote to close nominations for chair of the joint convention. Dr. Liu,
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf Dickoff,
Yes.
Ms. Charlepski,
Yes.
Dr. Ehrenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Nobrega.
Yes.
I also vote yes. Dr. Ashkenazi,
Yes.
Ms. Hamilton,
Yes.
Dr. Fernandez,
Yes.
Ms. Attorney Green,
Yes.
Mr. Van Scoyac.
Yes.
All right, now is there a motion for the chair of the joint convention? Ms. Monopoly, is there a second? Dr. Fernandez? All right, Dr. Liu,
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf Dickoff,
Yes.
Ms. Charlepski,
Yes.
Dr. Ehrenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Nobrega.
Yes.
I vote yes. Dr. Ashkenazi,
Yes.
Ms. Hamilton,
Yes.
Dr. Fernandez,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
and Mr. Van Scoyac.
Yes.
All right, so we now have a clerk of the convention, a chair of the convention. So next up, we can now go ahead and move into the interviews, and we will go in.
David, I think I need to officially open our session on the
Okay.
select board.
Go ahead.
So let's just get that out of the way, and then we can go straight to the interviews. So I move that the select board enter into the joint session with the school committee for the intended purpose of interviewing a candidate for the remaining term of the school committee. Those in favor say aye. Raul. Oh, sorry,
Aye.
Bernard. Bernard,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Miriam,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Back to you, David.
All right, so we will be going in alphabetical order with the candidates. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to make an opening statement, and then members of both the school committee and the select board can ask follow-up questions. We'll have approximately 10 minutes per candidate. We won't be super rigid about that, but that's going to be what we aim for. Then we will have ample opportunity to discuss the candidates and their interviews afterwards. So first up, we have Ms. Valerie Frias.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Most of you recall that not long ago, I was on the ballot for a school committee seat. So I didn't expect to be before you all this soon. I was looking at January. But that experience gave me much perspective on the constituencies, and having been in all 16 precincts all over town during that campaign, I get a really great sense of where the community is and where the community wants to go. So when this vacancy became open with Mr. Anselm's departure, I applied and appreciate your consideration this evening. I'm a Driscoll mom. I'm the parent of 2 rising 6th graders, a civil rights lawyer, a nonprofit leader for over a decade, and an activist. I'm the past co-chair of the Driscoll PTO. I serve on the board of CPAC, the Special Ed Advisory Council. I was a former member of the Driscoll Building Committee, as well as serving very recently on the Driscoll Principal Search. I also sat on the statewide LGBTQ Youth Commission and currently sit on the LGBTQ Aging Commission for the state. I've advised this district and others around the Commonwealth on legal and policy issues related to special education and diversity and inclusion, particularly as it relates to LGBTQ students. I spent my entire life fighting for people's rights. I currently run Ethos, which is a nonprofit in Jamaica Plain with a $50 million operating budget. That budget we expect to expand to somewhere in the $65 million range with ARPA money and other monies coming in, potentially upward of 70 million over the coming years. Prior to that, I was executive director at PFLAG, which is an LGBT civil rights organization. And before that, I worked at the Austin Brighton Community Development Corporation, where I was the executive director of a $150 million capital portfolio of 500 affordable housing units. So I have both capital finance experience as well as significant operational budget experience. I'll do a little bit of bio again. Prior to that, I worked for 10 years in state, local, and federal government. I maintain those relationships today. I've been working on our ARPA funding for my organization with the state and our federal partners, and would hope to bring that experience as a member of perhaps the government relations and or the finance committee, where I do be appointed to the school committee. I prioritize 5 issues, and those are the 5 issues that I prioritized during my campaign. Protecting school budgets during the pandemic and as we come out, hopefully post-Delta of the pandemic, centering voices of diversity and inclusion and safety for all PSB students, and really making sure that those who identify as AAPI, BIPOC, and LGBTQ are protected. Expanding mental health services, ensuring special ed services are fully funded and are appropriate for all of our students, and working with students to confront the climate crisis. My professional and personal experience has prepared me well for those priorities and to be a member of this committee. Again, as in my current role, I oversee a $50 million budget, including that federal and state money that both the school committee and the town have managed during the pandemic, and also the money that is to come into the town with ARPA and potentially an infrastructure bill.
Thank you. If you can please wrap up. So I just want to be able to give everyone about the same amount of time. You will have further time as you're responding to questions from the joint convention.
I can close there and happy to answer questions. I think that most folks have seen my information, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks for your time tonight.
All right, you're welcome. So who would like to ask the first question? Dr. Ashkenazi?
Hi, Val. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for applying for this vacancy. So I've decided I'm just going to have one question I'm going to ask across the board. So the other candidates want to prepare. This was going to be a select board recently took a vote on the SROs in the school, and I'm just curious as to where you fall on SROs in the public school system.
So I'm on record on this during the campaign, so that's an easy one. I opposed the SRO continuation in schools.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, any other questions? Ms. Wolf-Dickoff?
Sure, and John had his hand up too. So, so thank you, Val, for being here. A question for you just about the government funding piece. We don't have on the school committee right now, we've not had a lot of robust conversations about ARPA or about some of the other funding sources that might be available beyond sort of the one lump sum. So can you just tell us a little bit about just your experience in thinking about how to tap into various government funding streams on the school side or sort of more generally?
Sure. I can talk about both. On the school side, when we're talking about infrastructure, that's an allowable use, for example, in ARPA that maybe isn't one that comes to mind when you think initially about the ed funding. But I think that broadly speaking, with the ARPA funding, there's workforce money in there. There's money for through HHS for health programs and mental health programs that schools or the town or both may be able to apply for. On the town side, there's elder money right now that's going to be available, but it's not going to be available through Norfolk County. So if you're not really involved, you wouldn't know that it's actually coming through an organization that's based in Middlesex because they happen to cover Brookline in their catchment area. So, those are the types of details that I've been following. There's a hearing actually at the State House tomorrow that I'll be at, which is the first ARPA hearing of this round that they're having, and labor and workforce are the topic tomorrow. So, that type of knowledge and really keeping up with my state and federal partners is what I bring to the table.
Thank you.
Mr. Van Swyk?
Yes, thank you, David. And thank you, Val, very much for your interest in this seat on the school committee. With the COVID situation somewhat in a state of flux right now, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how the school committee should approach the very difficult questions of masking and also the question of mandatory vaccinations.
I don't think that we should go to mandatory vaccinations just yet. And I think that that's a conversation that would be had with the DESE level and other levels, and many conversations with lots of experts. That said, there are obviously lots of articles today on cities, states starting to require it. So it will be a conversation, and it will be a robust conversation that I think we need to have and need to listen to all sides of. In terms of masking, it's not a simple answer, although lots of people think maybe it is. I think that for anybody who is under the age of 12, we need to protect anyone who's under the age of 12 and is coming in contact with those who are under the age of 12. There's a lot about Delta that we really don't know. I think that it's a conversation we should definitely have, but it's also one that we need to make sure that we make exemptions for and things like that for students for whom it might be a disability, and the reasonable exemptions that were allowed for masking this past year. So I would lean toward a K-8 masking at a minimum at this point, but that again would be a group decision, and that's where I am at 7:23 on Monday.
Thank you very much, Val.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any further questions? We're right about at the 10-minute mark, but if someone else has a question, I'll hear it. All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Val, for joining us.
Thank you all.
We'll be talking about each candidate at the end.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Mr. John Hermos.
Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Nice to see you all again. Appreciate the chance to reapply for this position. I think my cover letters and CV include all the relevant demographic and professional information that you'll need. And just to include the fact that I have served on the Finance Committee under the great leadership of John Van Scoyac, among others. And even when I was not on town meeting, I was appointed to and volunteered in that. And as you can see, I've been active in many other town government and non-government activities. Last time I interviewed, Attorney Green fed me a softball question, which I really choked. He basically asked me what I had learned from the experience of a town in Englewood, New Jersey, where I grew up. Haven't been there for 60 years, but there was a real flight from the public schools simple question, what I learned from that. And basically, I think there's a universal answer that families will put their children's education as the top priority, whether these are, no matter what the socioeconomic status is. And I think that's what happened in my old hometown. I don't know if it's happening in Brookline. I would feel much aggrieved that it is if it were happening, and especially with the pandemic and families having other choices. But certainly one of the top priorities of the school committee is to maintain the quality of education. The saying the town of Brookline and great schools was basically synonymous, saying the same thing. And it would really be a privilege to work with all of you in maintaining that quality. Or if we're losing ground, re-achieving it. This isn't a Make America Great Again speech, I promise you. This is wondering what the situation in the schools is and how we might address it. But it's top priority for pretty much every family, and those even without children, that the schools are terrific in all respects. Regarding Ms. Coyne's list of topics to address, I don't think with a one-year appointment, and that's really all I'd be interested in, I think it would really be too much on anyone's table to both dive into being a new member of the school committee and then have to campaign townwide. Maybe some of you younger folks can do that, but I certainly couldn't and wouldn't. And whether that candidate should have a leg up with a one-year appointment, I'm not sure it's fair to the other candidates. So again, I would be a strong advocate for just this being a temporary appointment where we jump in, do as best we can, help out in many ways we can, and use what I would say is my experience as an older person and as a resident for 50 years to help improve the work of the committee in the schools. If there were an area I would be interested in, it's what happens, well, what will happen with our middle schools when the discussion of funding a new elementary school came up. I thought that a middle school would be a much better suggestion, maybe 6, 7, and 8, or 7, 8, 9. It's a wonderful time to enrich students' education, to read, but also to engage in art, shop, music, sports, computer science, community service, not to rehash what they might learn again in high school or physics light or things, but really use that opportunity to enrich. This is my 8th grade shoebox. 8th grade, shop, one of my favorite courses, even though I was a klutz. I think our students at that age, with all the hormones flowing and all the other desires to excel in something, I think middle school could be a great new learning experience. I'm not pretending to say that one interim year on the school committee would allow that to be an initiation or something that I could reasonably champion. But I was asked after my last application if I wanted to do work. I think it was one of the school committee members or who contacted me. I said, absolutely, I'd be happy to, but haven't heard since then. But that would be my pie in the sky initiative.
All right, thank you. Just want to try to keep it even in terms of the time allotments for introductory remarks.
I'm done, David.
You'll have some additional opportunities to speak now in responding to questions from members of the Select Board and School Committee. So who would like to ask the first question? Mr. Green.
Yeah, I'm impressed that you kept a shop project from 8th grade. I haven't kept the knowledge I learned from 8th grade. But that brings up, I think, an interesting issue, and that is, can we do more at the middle school level in a K-8 model to provide middle school students with special educational opportunities that maybe they're missing now? I mean, middle school is where you can do a lot of interesting stuff. But do you have any thoughts as to how we could do that within the context of K-8 system, which I think we're stuck with. I mean, I think it's probably good, but I don't think we're going to change that.
Right, that's basically the feedback I get, that we're so invested in that system and not going to change. I don't know what's being done now, but certainly schools could get together and combine projects like this. If you can't teach shop at every of the 7 or 8, or how many we have now, elementary schools, can there be combined projects? Certainly music can be a combined activity. Sports, people get together on the playing field already with the various sports programs, Little League or Babe Ruth League. I just feel it's a maximum time to think creatively and get age appropriate education. And it doesn't have to be reading, right? Well, it should be reading. I think reading, we can both read literature, great literature, and also read about social studies and history and critical race theories and good things, important things that our kids should learn. But I think we should go heavy on what we call the extracurricular or non-academic subjects in those years. And also when a kid graduates from I was about to say Dwight Morrow, from Brookline High School, that not only the children who have done well in AP and honors classes, and of course they'll get into the great schools, but also those who are on a less academic track, that those programs be honored just as much as the academic courses. There are huge opportunities in this new world for folks who don't have traditional college educations to do well. So all of these things are of interest. Again, I don't know if 1 year on a school committee, just one little member, but I think these are things that the committee and the select board should look at in the future, for the future of the schools.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions? I think I saw another hand, Dr. Fernandez. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for applying for this position. I think one of the things that we, I feel the loss of Dimitri Anselm is someone with a deeply informed focus on racial equity. I'm hoping that we can not just at this moment, but through future elections, continue to build on that on the school committee. Including some folks that we have currently on the committee right now. I'm wondering if you can talk about how your appointment would help address that loss.
I would do everything in my. This sounds so trivial, but my all-time boyhood hero was Jackie Robinson. Always was and always will be. And coming from a community like Englewood, New Jersey, where so many of my friends and fellow athletes and fellow students were minorities. So that's a deep interest in my heart. I don't know, there are, I'm not exactly sure, I'm choking on this question too, but I'm not sure about the breadth of your question as to how we should go about teaching this or creating the environment in which racial equity is a high priority. That's definitely that should be part of it. What the specifics are, I couldn't say now, but certainly there can be programs on racial equity and getting the school children involved actively in it. I know I work for the Sister City program, and there's a wonderful program now for some of the high school students going to Nicaragua and learning about Latin America, learning about Central America, the difficult political and economic issues down there. And certainly we can do the same with regard to racial equity right here in Brookline or in Greater Boston, and particularly in this country. Thank
All
you for
Thank you.
asking that.
Dr. Ashkenazi, I think you wanted to ask your question that you're going to give to everybody.
Well, actually, I think I got my answer. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Because we're at about that 10-minute mark that we'd like to try to keep even for everybody.
Thank you.
All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Hermos, for joining us.
Well, okay, doctor, by the way, but
Doctor, sorry.
he's Attorney Green, I'm Dr. Hurst.
Hey, actually, we're all equal here.
We are all equal, yes.
All right, so next up we have Gerald Kutcher.
Can you folks hear me okay?
Yes, we can. So feel free to begin when you're ready.
This is the first time I've ever attended a joint convention. I'm honored. I have been a long time participant in town government. I spent 30 years in town meeting, including a term on the advisory committee. And I feel as though I'm very familiar with the issues facing the schools. The starting point, of course, would be the schools are the crown jewel that attracts and retains many people coming to Brookline and attracts and retains the diverse population that we see here. Because people who want their kids to get a good education, whether it's through the old METCO program or through actual enrollment in the public schools, want to move here so that their kids can participate in the schools. When my wife and I were looking for a place to live back in the early 1970s, Brookline was the place that we chose. We moved here in 1976 and have been here ever since. Although I do confess to taking a 5-year detour through Chicago. I had been working as the science dean and associate provost at Simmons, and I was invited to go to the largest university in the Midwest and the largest Catholic university in the country and start a health and science college. So I accepted a 5-year contract, and my wife, of course, refused to move. So I was commuting back to Brookline 2 or 3 weekends a month. And after 5 years of excitement, Chicago, I have returned and I would like to get re-involved in town government. I saw this opportunity and it was very exciting to me. My background, as you saw on the resume, is as a pediatric psychologist. I started my career at Boston Children's Hospital and became chief of psychology there at a time when that also included the Judge Baker Children's Center and the pediatric psychology component of Dana-Farber, and stayed there till 2001 when I fled managed care into academic administration. That was as a health science dean and later as associate provost at Simmons, then on to DePaul, and then back here to Massachusetts. At the moment, I'm doing some part-time private practice, and I'm on the faculty at the Harvard Medical School Bioethics Center, and I remain on the medical staff at Boston Children's Hospital, where I do teaching and supervision of interns and fellows. My background has included a lot of work in education, not only at the college and university level, but also dealing with IEPs, helping families negotiate special educational parameters, even at times acting as an expert witness in educational matters. I have a lot of experience in financial management, apart from my 3-year term on the advisory committee. In my stint in town meeting, I was responsible for a $65 million budget at DePaul, in the second largest college there. I have a strong interest in public service. I've done that for a long time. And at Brookline, aside from the town meeting, I was chairman of the board of trustees of the Brookline Mental Health Center for more than a decade. and I've been involved in several other nonprofits. But my thought about the school board and the opportunity to get involved with that is the idea of focusing on high quality student education that has kept and made our school system so valuable. Another key element of the Brookline Public Schools, depending on who you talk to, this is wonderful or terrible, is the strong, continuous involvement of neighborhoods and parents in the school system. We have, I don't need to tell you because I'm sure that all of you hear from parents frequently. Some communities that doesn't happen, but that's sort of part of life in Brookline because folks want to be involved with their kids' schools. They want to play a role in that. And the school committee has to be the representative voice of those parents in overseeing the school system. Another thing which is very important about both the Brookline Public Schools and the town itself is its diversity. You look around at our neighbors and you don't see the diversity, inclusion, and commitment to equity that we see in Brookline. One of the questions which you threw out, which I'm willing to take a whack at, are two attributes that have troubled me. I've watched the repeated attempts to hold on to a superintendent. I'm delighted that we now have Dr. Guillory in that role. And I hope that we can provide the administrative support and backup needed to hold on to an educator and administrator of his caliber in the system. The other issue I think is a challenge that faces us all, and certainly as a newbie and looking at the budget, which I have just done over the past week, is to think about how we are going to maintain school quality and adequately prepare for the enrollment growth, both in terms of fiscal operations and infrastructure. One of the things I noted that you were interested in hearing about were priorities, especially in terms of budget priorities. Mine.
Please wrap up your introductory remarks. You will have an opportunity to elaborate more. I just want to be fair to all the candidates and give them about the same.
I am ready for your questions and we'll
Okay.
address any of them.
All right, so Dr. Ashkenazi, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for applying for this position. I appreciate your commitment to the town. You had referred to your feeling that this Brookline is a very committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And personally, as a parent of two kids of color, my experience is that Brookline is quite schizophrenic on this topic. And in fact, the reason I'm asking this particular question about the SROs is I find it speaks to a greater, deeper understanding of these issues. So I am going to ask you the question, which is, we recently voted on school resource officers, continuing that program in the school system. And I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are and how you would have voted.
I probably would have joined the vote against school resource officers. I mean, we've all seen, obviously not in Brookline, but handcuffing of first graders, assaults of adolescents, and situations that probably could have and should have been de-escalating. One of my concerns as a mental health professional is the emotional and mental health and well-being of the people in the school system. And I would include in that, by the way, not only the students, but the faculty and staff. And as a mental health professional, I'm committed to the idea that there are ways to de-escalate concerns if you have a disruptive student that don't require a uniformed officer in the building. I hope that addresses your question.
That does. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ehrenberg, go ahead.
Thank you, David. Dr. Kutcher, you mentioned in your cover letter that you've written on the topic of youth and crises. It seems like an area where I'd be very curious about your insights about about children's socio-emotional challenges returning to school this coming year. What would you advise the school committee on how to provide adequate social emotional supports to students after this very disruptive last year?
Well, it's one of my books is the Parent's Guide to Psychological First Aid, but this is going to require a lot more than first aid. This is a chronic situation. You've got teachers who may have health compromises, who are worried about coming back. You have parents who desperately want their kids back in normal education, but we know that kids under 12 aren't likely to have full access to vaccinations, at least until after the school year starts. So the key issue, thinking as a psychologist, is going to be anxiety. And how do you best diffuse anxiety? You diffuse anxiety by having plans, by giving people information, by listening to them, by telling them what you're going to provide to them, and then by listening again. And what's going to be needed is emotional support for all the components of that. I know that the school, at least when I was familiar with the school through my daughter's passage through Baker and Brookline High School, had very good emotional support services. And I know that the Brookline Mental Health Center was in the forefront of providing them for a number of years. And I would be wanting to see work take place very much before the year gets started on a plan for doing all of that. And what I mean by doing all that is a plan where kids know what to expect, parents know what to expect, know where we're going to take our guidance from, and have opportunities to talk through the stresses and to be supported in that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Green?
Yeah, Mr. Kutcher, I want to push back on an answer regarding the SROs that you gave. You mentioned that we all have seen pictures of SROs abusing kids, et cetera, et cetera. However, I don't think you have any evidence that that has happened in Brookline. And my question really is, what is the way in which you process things that are going on outside of Brookline in terms of understanding and addressing issues that we have here in Brookline? I mean, I can talk about how psychologists have really been brutally brutal against Black kids throughout the country, including here in Massachusetts. But I'm not going to attribute that to you as a psychologist. So I just want to know how you think about these things, given that you cited a terrible incident, which I think occurred in South Carolina, as the underpinning for your position that school resource officers here in Brookline ought to be eliminated.
Thank you for circling back to that. I think what I said at the beginning is we haven't seen that in Brookline, and I'm glad that we haven't seen it in Brookline. I certainly saw it in the Chicago public schools, and that one incident that you just cited was not the whole of what we saw last year. We saw it in Florida. We saw one in California. So the issue for me is putting into place a support system where the key staff in any school building are trained at de-escalation. You may have seen the video clip that went viral of the young man who showed up at his school with a long gun, and the coach went out in the hallway and talked to them, and the young man ended up in the embrace of the coach and handing over the gun. That kind of training, the training to understand and recognize early when there are at-risk situations, and then to intervene in a caring way, I believe that can be taught and trained into a system without the need for armed personnel. And I just have to say one other thing. As a former president of the American Psychological Association, and as a former member of the Massachusetts Licensing Board, any psychologist who's been brutal or inappropriate with any human being based on race, social class, or any other individual issue ought to be reported.
Well, that's a separate issue. I'm talking about the history of psychology, teaching, many professions that we don't attribute the worst of those professions to every individual situation that we face. I'm concerned about the methodology. or your methodology? How do you think about issues like that? But that's it.
And the way I think about it is early intervention, which means recognizing a problem, recognizing someone who may be at risk, and providing early intervention, and having the community, and by this I mean the community in the school setting with the support of the upper administration, intervene early as caring educators.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kutcher, for joining us. I want to try to keep this roughly even between candidates. So we're going to move on, but we'll be discussing your resume and also the responses from all of the candidates after this. So thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Next up is Mr. Wadner Ogi, and if you could tell us how to pronounce your name, I probably didn't get that correct.
It's Wadner Oje.
Okay, thank you for joining us, Mr. Oje. Go ahead and begin whenever you're ready.
My name is Wadner Oje, and I am a husband, a parent to two beautiful children, a sixth grader, rising sixth grader, and a rising first grade.
May I interrupt? I'm sorry. Ms. Oje, you're appearing sideways on the screen, at least for me, maybe for others. Beautiful. I want to make sure everybody can see you. Thank you.
Basically, I'm here today because I believe in the district vision and mission and core values and the goals. Because I know Brookline is a unique, dynamic town with a great school system, with a lot of political influences as well as social economic influences. And I'm pretty much new to this, but I believe that become a part of this special committee, I can make a difference, and I can be a voice of reasons, and I can bring different perspectives. And I have been a professional, experienced professional, working in state government for at least a decade, and I understand a lot of dynamics, factors in terms of making decision policies. And I know one of the questions is racial equality. And I know that it is a major goal that the town is trying to achieve, equality, especially racial equality in its education system. One of the factors that pushed me to go forward with putting my application. And I have a lot of parents that I have been around them. That's when they listen to me, my thought, my ideas, my perspective about education, they always think that I should consider become a school committee member. And I usually take that compliment and then say, eventually when the opportunities come in, I will make sure that I put my name forward to join the committee. You know, I'm new to this. I'm not gonna, try to flood it, but I know that I can be a voice of reason, and I can bring different perspective, and especially in equality. Throughout my time being part of this district, I have looked at the data, and I have seen the town is doing great with the overall population, student population. But when you look at the data based on race, there is a gap. And I know that gap can be addressed, and because the town has the resources to address it. A wise man usually say that, show me your budget and then I'll show you what your priorities are. So I believe that if the town, as one of the core values and goal is to address racial inequity in the system, is to come in with a line item budget to say, this is what we're gonna commit the resources to address racial inequity. And also there's the question about resource officers. The resource officers, I know it's coming, I will vote against it because I know that there are other resources, professional a specialist we can put in different school to address those issues at the early age rather than allow it to become an issue. Then we have to use force. We have to use power to address it. This is where it's stigmatized those students, particularly students of color. I am also a member of the Boston Bar Association, and they have been working to address the pipeline to prisons. Because once you stigmatize those students, they feel like they're not valuable. You don't see them. And this is where it started, they go into the one, they become so rebellious. But once you address them, the previous interviewers, there are a lot of ideas that I agree with. Once you put the resources to address the issue at the beginning, you don't have to use force. You don't need a resource police officers to deal with it because you commit to it. So this is my main objective. The reason why I'm here is to come in, to be a voice of reason, to be a collaborator, and to build consensus. Because I know the town is doing great. We can do better than that. We do have the resources. All we have to do is to come in with a plan and then present the plan, get the community engagement, get the parents, explain this plan. This is the program I'm gonna do. This is how I'm gonna do it. This is why it needs to be done in Brookline. And then I believe we can do that together. And that's the reason why I'm here today. I know there are a lot of interviewers, they have different perspectives. I'm a newcomer. And then I'm not gonna I'm gonna come in to listen and then to provide suggestions and so that we can go to a different direction. And I agree to the point, Brookline is the ultimate destination. I have spoken to different parents from all over the state when they moved to Massachusetts. Brookline is the destination. So we're doing something great, but let's do better than that. Let's address the racial inequality in the system so that based on the mission, we have to educate all childs, regardless their social economic background, regardless their race, regardless the national origin, regardless the sexual orientation, regardless the disability. Let's give every child an opportunity to be great, to be a higher achiever. Thank you. I will answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Oji. Mr. Green?
Yeah, Mr. Oji, so you said, show me your budget and I'll show you your values. One of the problems we have here in Brookline and in many predominantly white communities is the achievement gap of Black students, especially or including Black students from middle-class families, which is apparently is not a problem in integrated communities. So where would you put the money in the school budget to address that issue as it relates to all students, but address the fact that why are middle-class Black students suffering from the same achievement gap as other students?
There's what they call a subconscious bias that exists in almost every community. Sometimes we're not aware of it. So first thing is, if we have the resources, we say the town is going to commit X amount of dollars to recruit professionals that can provide more training to the staff, and then to recruit bring more diversity in the staff. Sometimes students would like to see someone they can look up to. And then if they feel that they don't see a role model in front of them, even though they have the full potential to be great, they end up pulled back, reluctant to move forward. So by putting resources, funding to listen to experts, there are a lot of experts out there at the university and colleges. We can bring them in. They can present a program to the school committee. Once they present the program to the school committee, so we will be responsible working in collaboration with the school department, the community, going out there, sell it to the people, because I believe that resident of Brookline, they want to see every child excel, but it's the structure that already exists that we have to train put more money, put more resources on training the teachers to bring a different dynamic. That one of the things that they come in, one of the issue that when I look at in the system, when I look at the data, is there's the disciplinary against student of color is higher compared to other white students. And then I know the school department trying to come in with some program, restorational justice, going around the school and then try to train different staff. And listen, I think that's a great program. That's one of the programs we can invest more and then, have it more become part of the school system so that we can address those things. We cannot do it alone. For example, hire staff of color, it's great, but it's a community, it's a village. So we have to work together to collaborate in order to address that issue. And then I believe that it can be done in this town, but it has to be a full effort. Not only the district, it has to be the town board of selectmen. It has to be everybody across the board working together, engage the community, explain the community, because it is one of the core values of the town. So it's already exists. All we have to do is put the resources in there and then try to promote it and then get community engagement and then make it happen. And I believe that we can do it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ochi. Any other questions? Dr. Ashkenazi?
All right, I just would like to say, I think that it's currently being referred to more as an opportunity gap rather than achievement gap. And I applaud you, Mr. Oji. I think your answer really speaks to that. So I'm not going to ask my SRO question because you answered it in your comments. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions? Okay, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Oji.
David, if no one else has a question, then I'd like to ask a question. Thank you, Dr. Oji, for applying and talking with us today. Could you, I know you've said that you're a newcomer, but could you tell us a bit about your background with education?
My background, originally I'm from Haiti, and I have been living in Boston ever since I came here. And I went to Northeastern undergrad, and I'm very familiar with the Brookline community. And I used to be a medical parent. But I have been within the community for over approximately 6 years, and I have been very active. I used to be a PTO member, and I used to be the president, the co-president for extended day program at the Florida Rafting Really School. Used to be devotion and change to rafting Ridley schools, and I also served on the math program, math review program for 2 years, and then this is where I have seen the data. I know we call it opportunities gap, but I see the data coming from the state, and I always, whenever the AMCAS come out, I look at those data. I always look at those data, and then I see the town. Overall, the town is great, but when you look at based on the racial line, disability, things like that, there's a different story. I feel like I'm part of the town, and I'm always at the school event. I'm engaged, very engaged, and I believe that I really seriously believe I can be a voice of reason, a new voice, and I know that one of the question is sometimes the school committee facing with tough situation in terms of budgeting. And when you get those situations, you have to keep in mind, there's a state standard. You have to keep that. That's the level, the state standard. Every district has to meet. Then you should hire. And then this is where the town is. The town is above the state level, but I believe that we can do better. And being part of the community, I know that there are resources available in this community. I look at the data, real estate data, every data. So it's just about when you get a message, you get a plan, is to get the community engaged. You get the plan, you get the expert. It's gonna be, that's what I usually refer it. It's take a village to educate a child. So once you have the plan, you have credible evidence, then you talk about it. There's a consensus among the committee. Then you go out get the community engaged. If there's a need for funding, once you get the community to believe in that, they will support whatever program it is, but you have to get them engaged. One part, you go get them engaged, you listen to them, and then you gathering, and then you tailor it based on the community's need. If there's a need for the community, if there's a need right now, there's a need to address the inequity, as the social inequity gap. That's opportunities, and that's what we need to do. That's one of direction that we need to promote to the community, because they already believe in it. It just, we have to take action to make it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oji. Okay, next up we have Miss Nancy Ray Gore.
Can you hear me?
You can, yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. To begin, I'd like to thank our select board members and our school committee members, both new and returning. It's an honor to be here. I want you to know that I love our Brookline schools. We made the decision to stay here because of our richly diverse schools. And Brookline has a reputation for educational excellence and a commitment to the social, emotional well-being of the whole child, from early education to high school. Our schools are thoughtful and sensitive to, amongst many other aspects, race, culture, gender, and socioeconomic status, and we commit to supporting all of our kids in order to be successful in every way, and that is remarkable. We joined the Brookline Schools family through BEEP in 2010, and those of you who know me have often heard me refer to our schools as a family, and I believe that that's who we are. To our beloved teachers, administration, and to the greater community that makes up this family, regardless of who you are or where you're from, I have been your mom, your friend, your trusted information resource, your staunch advocate, and your fierce supporter. And of course, your on-demand supplier of baked goods, especially for brownies. I've even been known to give you a heads up on impending weather that you might not see coming. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Brookline is an incredibly well-stocked reserve of talented human resources. When COVID inevitably came to town, with almost military speed, task forces were pulled together and navigated Brookline through a pandemic. People have asked, how did we do that? The school committee and administration called, and our Brookline community answered. We came up with a plan and executed. Communication at its finest. So how can I help? Prior to moving to Massachusetts from New York City, I worked in advertising and direct marketing. Basically, that means I help organizations talk to people. Over the years, we've seen Brookline schools go through many changes and challenges, from the classroom to the boardroom. Our community has accomplished tremendous and even super heroic work. All of these amazing things need to be talked about, and I'd like to help you. Unfortunately, this pandemic isn't over. Clear, timely, trusted communication that's able to flow back and forth will be one of the most helpful resources that will enable us to feel safer and get us through this and to the other side. Let's open up some more safe channels that facilitate timely and even two-way communication. I may have been retired from corporate America when I became a mom, but I've been working in one way or another to support our schools and our community this whole time. It would be an honor to be a member of our Brookline School Committee, and if selected, I'll do my absolute best to help all of us stay informed and talking. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions for Ms. Ray Gore? Who would like to go first? Dr. Ashkenazi?
I mean, I don't have to go first if anybody else has a question, but thank you so much for applying for this position and for being so committed to Brookline. I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'm curious to know where you would fall on the discussion about SROs in the school system.
And I'm glad you brought this up. I actually am a huge supporter of our SROs. Mainly because I know our SROs personally. Officer McCabe and her dog Bear are beloved. Well, I can talk for Runkle School, are beloved in Runkle Schools. Am I missing the?
Actually, Officer McCabe and Bear are not part of the SRO program.
Oh, I'm also familiar with Officer Killigan. Is he part of the SRO program?
No, Bear is part of the SRO program.
So that is my familiarity with the SRO program. I'm a supporter. Officers in our school have come by, and our student body or our teachers or administration, we don't see them as anything other than part of our Runkle family. We take comfort in them, and I've never heard anyone, both parents or administration, object to their presence in any way, shape, or form. Does that answer your question, Mr. Green?
It does. Thank you very much.
Mr. Green, go ahead.
Okay, that was a courageous answer in this
I understand that.
so I'd like to just have you talk about how you would address similar issues that come before the school committee, where everyone on the school committee, as well as many people in town, are saying you got to go one way, and from your experience, your expertise, or whatever, that maybe another approach to a particular problem is appropriate. I mean, do you have the fortitude to stand your ground when everyone else is saying that that's not the cool thing to do?
The problem with controversial issues is a lot of times it's communication is the key to understanding what is at the crux of the issue. I know that through the news and through a lot of public communication that certain topics are controversial. But have we asked the parents how they feel? Has there been a two-way dialogue? I think when we talk about it, I think we can sort of understand how to get to the crux of the issue. Does that answer your question, Mr. Green?
Yeah.
I just need to correct myself, David. So Katie is a part of the SRO program. Bear is a part of the behavioral health program, but crosses into the SRO program when he's with the SRO officers. But he will still continue to go to the schools. I just want to I correct myself. I was wrong, and I want to make that correction.
Who's going to take him to the schools? No.
He has other handlers who are not in the SRO program.
Oh, is that right? Officer McCabe is beloved. She is part of our Runkle family. We are always delighted to see her, and I hate to say it, but we're more delighted to see the dog. So, Officer Bear. So I'm sorry if it's an unpopular opinion, but I personally am in support of SROs.
Okay, do we have some other questions? Mr. Van Scoyk?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Nancy, very much. I didn't know you until this presentation that you just gave. I'm very impressed with your communication skills and your communication background. And I just would love to hear you briefly evaluate the state of communications in Brookline. It's a broad topic, but if you had advice to offer the schools and the town from your professional perspective on good communication, what would it be?
So I think we have to start with mapping what our current communication program is. I think that Dr. Marini started with his weekly letter, or let me just start. We're in the middle of this pandemic, and this is a very, very scary time. Communication is what's going to take us through the other side. Dr. Marini started that weekly newsletter, and I think that was a source of information that everybody hung on. I think that we can do better. I think that two-way communication is going to be the lifeblood of this town. One of the great channels that's already open to us is our site councils. If we put some structure around our site councils and standardize the back and forth communication, that is it's open to parents, it's open to teachers, it's open to administration. Talk to us. We can talk back through the site councils. The town, our town halls were incredibly effective in that it allowed for two-way communication. We should do more of that. And I know that Dr. Guillory is open to that. I know that we all receive hundreds and hundreds of emails. Well, actually, you probably receive more than I do. Can we figure out a way to categorize those and put them on a platform that people are aware of, that we can get them so that information is shared? I think that talking to each other, we need to learn to talk to each other better. Transparency and clarification, I think that that's going to help a lot. How are we doing? I think we're doing better than we ever have. I think we can do even more.
Thanks, Nancy.
Sure.
Dr.
I'd like to help you and I can help you.
Dr. Liu?
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for applying, and I'm very pleased to meet you.
Hi, Dr. Liu.
So yeah, you had compared the Brookline schools to a family. Seems to me to be a family where people fight each other a lot, never more so than in the past 18 months. So wondering what your approach would be to trying to lower the temperature here within this family and get us back to harmony.
I come from a large family, so I know that there's always fighting. I think just like I suggested, I think that the way to take to air, to diffuse a lot of situations is to talk. We have to talk to each other. We have to get better at talking to each other. I think that our school committee is doing a much better job than we used to. And that's not a criticism, just an observation. I think that if we could figure out a way to communicate even better, I think it would take a lot of I think a lot of what we heard in the school committee meetings, and I went to all of them, was fear. I think the way to diffuse fear is through information. I think Dr. Marini's letter did a great job. The town hall, everybody hung on his every word. I think that the more that we can talk about how their decisions were made and then get feedback from people, and I'm not talking through Facebook, I'm talking about opening up channels of communication somehow. How about an Ask Dr. Guillory column someplace, maybe even in the Brookline Patch? How about an Ask the School Committee column in the Brookline Patch? Or we have to find a platform, maybe on the town platform, so that we can talk to each other. And I think once you diffuse the fear, I think that a lot of that anger will be diffused as well.
All right, thank you. I want to try to keep this roughly even between our candidates. Does anyone else have another question, or are we ready to move on? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, Ms. Ray Gore.
Thank you, everybody.
Now, I do want to mention that we did end up giving a little more time to our final three candidates. Did anyone have any additional questions for Ms. Frias or Dr. Hermos? Okay, seeing none, we're ready to move on to the discussion portion. So who would like to go first in providing some impressions?
David, well, I'm not going to provide impressions, but I'm going to give a thought. I think we all need some time maybe to think a little bit, or at least I do, about the candidates, their qualifications, and what they've said. And I'm wondering if on Wednesday, when we get together, that might be a more opportune time to do that. I mean, I'm open for people to talk now, but it's just a thought.
So we are currently scheduled to also have a meeting of the joint convention on Wednesday if necessary. However, there might be some members who would like to move forward today. So I would appreciate if we could hear from others about whether you feel prepared to move forward with a discussion of the candidates now and or a vote, or if you would prefer to defer until Wednesday. Ms. Mobley?
I prefer to wait to vote until Wednesday. I prefer to have some time to think and reflect myself. I'm happy to hear discussion if other people have impressions that perhaps they want to share. But I like time to process.
All right, anyone else?
I'm not really sure whether or not the select board was really informed that we would be meeting on Wednesday. So I'd be curious to hear if other select board members have Wednesday open at this point. Is it 7 p.m.?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you notice it?
Yeah. I got notice, but it wasn't very clearly stated, so I can see how some people may have missed it. I had to go looking for it.
Mr. Van Scoyac?
I was aware that Wednesday had been reserved for the possibility that the vote would not take place tonight, and we might need to come back. And I can't speak for anyone but myself. I can make it Wednesday. And I take seriously the interest of the members of the school committee who have spoken in holding off until Wednesday to make the decision. Having heard them state that interest, I'd feel, sort of guilty if we push them, into making the decision when they don't feel ready to make the decision.
Dr. Ashkenazi?
So I respect what John has just said. At the same time, I'm just putting out there that I personally would feel comfortable discussing, at least at the very least, discussing the candidates tonight, and then depending on that discussion, taking a vote.
All right. Anyone else like to comment on this? Dr. Fernandez?
Sure, I'm good either way, and I'm available Wednesday.
All right. How about other school committee members who haven't spoken yet? Their thoughts about whether to proceed today or on Wednesday? Speaking for myself, I'd be inclined to at least begin the discussion today and then see where we are. And if we want to take more time, then we can come back on Wednesday. But I think we could at least begin. Ms. Nobrega?
Not that we need to do what we did last time, but last time, I think on the first night, we did a sort of a straw poll of where people were leaning. And then we sort of had the full discussion at the next meeting. So maybe we could consider something like that.
All right, Ms. Wolf-Dickoff?
Yeah, no, one of the things I think has been helpful in the past is to at least start the discussion tonight and then decide whether we can finish it or not. I think sometimes even just hearing what people's priorities are, what's important to them, what they heard, can be an important sort of step forward. Whether or not we do an official straw poll, whether or not we do an official vote, we may know a lot more. We may be able to do it, and we may not, but we'll know a lot more after we at least maybe have a little bit of discussion about what people heard that was important to them, what their priorities are.
Right, I would completely concur with that reasoning, because if we do end up holding off until Wednesday for the vote, it would be helpful to have some idea through the discussion we have with each other now as to what people are prioritizing that might have influence our own reflections. All right, so would someone like to, Ms. Nobrega?
Do you want me to kick it off?
Go right ahead.
Okay. So the things that I'm prioritizing are people who have some sort of understanding of what they're getting into. It's only a brief appointment. It's a 10-month appointment, a 9-month appointment. And so to whatever extent someone will be able to take advantage of that time and really be able to make the most of the relatively short appointment. So in my mind, that leads me to think more about people who have deep experience in some of these areas, either governmental or with children. So for me, that would be Ms. Frias, Val Frias, Mr. Oji, and Dr. Kutcher are the three I'm leaning more towards for those reasons.
All right, who would like to go next? Dr. Fernandez?
Sure. Mariah made it easy for me because those are the exact three names that I was thinking of. And for those very reasons, I think each of them brings something very different. They're not the three, in any case, very similar people, but I think each of them brings with them a certain type of equity lens and really relevant experience that I think would help the board right away. So any of those three.
Mr. Van Swag?
Thanks again. Okay, so I want to say how incredibly impressed I am with all five people that we've heard from tonight. Boy, if anyone had doubts as to the quality of people who come forward to volunteer their time in Brookline, I think they would be just blown away, as I was, by this group of five. Having said that, and taking the opportunity to thank John Hermos for being much too generous in mentioning the fact that he and I served together on the advisory committee years ago. I was so happy to see John and to see Jerry take part in this, but I am going to give the edge to the other three candidates. In large part, it's just generational. You know, I think we're looking at the next generation of leadership in the town and in the school on the school committee, and we have three great representatives of that here tonight. And of the three, as I said earlier, I had not been introduced to Nancy before. I found her very refreshing and was very happy to see her come forward and to speak her views on an issue I feel strongly about. I hope in the future that I will have more than one opportunity to vote for, either her or Mr. Oji. I'm leaning in favor of Val Frias because Val's a person that I've been fortunate to get to know over years, and yet she keeps surprising me with how much she has done, how significant are the responsibilities that she has assumed, and how much she really does have to bring to the school committee. So I very much welcome that she ran for the school committee, and I doubly welcome that she's interested in trying through this appointment to serve again. Thanks.
All right, who would like to go next? Ms. Hamilton?
I'll echo a lot of what John said. I'm inclined, though, to support Val Frias. She ran a townwide campaign not too long ago, and so the voters are familiar with her, and I feel confident that she would then run. She is capable of running a townwide campaign, which is not for the faint of heart. It is grueling. It's humbling at times, but it's what is necessary in order to serve on either select board or school committee.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff, I think I saw that you wanted to speak.
Yeah, no, I just want to echo what I think what John and Heather just said. I'm so impressed with the quality of the people that come forward, and Brookline's one of those places that has such a wealth of volunteer spirit, but also talent. I mean, a couple things are in my mind. One is that, you know, the school committee job is not an entry-level job, and it definitely is not an entry-level job sort of in the summer of 2021, where someone has a very short amount of time to get up to speed and start producing, start contributing, you know, as a strong member of the committee. So I just want to echo what Mariah said on that one. You know, I also think that there's something really important about having the sense of the townwide pulse. As Heather just mentioned, it is really different having come out of a school myself. You know, having one school perspective and having a townwide perspective are two really different things. And I think the last thing I'll say is that it's really important at the school committee, unlike the select board or other offices, the school committee really is a governing board. We are not an executive, so we're not the CEO, we're not the select board's, sort of 5-part mayor system. We are a governing board. We have a superintendent. So I think one of the things that I've observed is that people who have deep subject matter expertise or are quite deep in one area, like mental health, like communications, like something else, can be enormously valuable in the system. Perhaps not at a school committee level until some of those more district-wide sort of policy, financial issues, government relations issues come up. But I do think that there are definitely ways that I can imagine all 5 folks contributing to the district. But as I think about somebody who can sort of hit the ground running day one and someone who has a sense of the full town and has a sense of a wide breadth of issues, I think I sort of land on Valerie Frias also, and very much hope the other 4, we find ways to engage them because there's just tremendous wisdom in what some of them said.
All right. Dr. Ashkenazi?
Thank you. I'm just really, if I could just say ditto to to Susan and Heather and John and Raul and Mariah. I think that the key issues that rise to the top for me are that, Val Frias ran a campaign that really touched in every single precinct and looked at every single school. I think that she understands the time commitment, the level of work, the idea that she can hit the ground running is very important and real. I think she has an equity lens that's very deep and personal, which I admire. And I also think her ARPA and her budget experience will be very critical to this role. And so I would say what Susan said, which is for the other candidates, I think there's really a place for you to contribute. I really implore you to think about volunteering your time. If in the end you don't get voted into this role, there is so much you can add. But in this particular case, for this particular position, I think Val Frias is the most qualified candidate.
All right, who would like to go next? Dr. Ehrenberg?
Thanks, David. So I'll just add my voice to the consensus. I think, first of all, those were 5 strong candidates, and I feel like we're lucky to have such strong candidates. I thought I was impressed with Dr. Kutcher's background in social emotional and what the social emotional needs of children and adolescents are. I was impressed with Dr. Ogie's breadth of experience and his evident passion for joining the committee. And although I was initially concerned about any potential lack of educational background, he assured me on that front with his answer to my question when he talked about his PTO involvement and his involvement in other school level work. But I do think that Val demonstrated, as everyone said, an ability to jump right in. To me, the top priority, the top criteria really are ability to contribute right away. And I think it's also important for the school committee to remain broadly representative and diverse. And I think Val is also identifies as Latinx. And we competed against each other in a campaign, and she ran a very impressive, respectful campaign. So I think she's a very strong candidate.
All right, thank you. Mr. Green?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at 2 people, Val Frias and Ms. Ray Gore. That's how you pronounce her name. Yeah, Val presented herself to the community during the previous school board race or school committee race. And we learned about her. We learned her temperament, we learned her ideas. We learned whether, even where we disagree with her, we could trust her that she would do a good job. And she came out fairly well for me. However, I want to also say something about Ms. Ray Gore. Here in Brookline, one of the issues, as everyone knows, I am concerned about is how easy it is to sort of go along to get along. And we don't have very many people in this town who have the courage to stand against the tide. And I was impressed by the fact that she stood against the tide. She knew that we wanted, or many people in this group wanted her to say a certain thing about the school resource officers. But she had the courage to stand up and say, this is what I think based on my experience. I think that's important. Maybe, I'm not sure, that is deterrentative for me, but I just want to make sure that, I put on the record that, we need to have, courage on our committees. And I hope that, current school committee members, get some backbone and take Ms. Ray Gore's example to heart.
Are you implying we don't have a backbone, Bernard?
I'm an investigator. I don't know. So
I'm not laughing.
That's my thinking. Well, sorry.
All right, who would like to go next?
Directed at you anyway, by the way, or anyone.
Who would like to go next? Dr. Liu?
Right. Well, I don't think there's any need for me to join the pylon in favor of Val, but I did think during the campaign, and I still think now, that she would strengthen the committee in two areas where it really needs some strengthening. One is with her understanding of special education as a parent and a CPAC board member and a civil rights attorney. And number two, with her experience in dealing with levels of government above our own, especially the state level, where probably a large amount of our funding will be coming from over the next few years. So those were gaps that I thought already existed even before the campaign. She fills those gaps very impressively. So I intend to support her.
All right, who would like to go next?
I'm sorry, Andy, were you saying Val? I didn't catch who you were talking about.
Yes, Val.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else like to go? Go ahead.
I just want to follow up on what Andy said. The other place that we don't have, we have a lot of support, but where we can use more strength is in LGBTQ representation. She has been quite a powerful advocate at the state level, and really a very thoughtful advocate, with working closely with superintendents around the Commonwealth on LGBTQ issues in her prior role. And Bernard, it just made me think, as you were thinking about sort of standing up for difficult issues before, either before they were popular or when they weren't popular. I've been quite impressed with that piece. And I know that prior superintendents in Brookline have really relied on her advice in some pretty sticky situations that had nothing to do with her specifically, but just relied on her advice and counsel on LGBTQ issues. So anyway, I just it made me think of that as well. Not to take away anything from anyone else, but just those two comments really sparked that in my mind.
All right, Ms. Charlevsky or Ms. Monopoly, are you ready to opine?
Are you going to opine, David?
I will, yes, sure, I'll go. So I'm going to agree with a majority of what we've heard. I think that it's important to put yourself out there in a campaign, to be in every precinct, to be in every school. Ms. Frias put herself before the voters. She's the only one of our applicants who received public support on a very direct level in terms of people voting for her. She has a very impressive resume. She would add to the diversity of this committee. She has some very specific knowledge-based areas, but she's also very well diversified in terms of town governance and systems and how they work. She'd be able to hit the ground running. So she's very impressive to me. I also want to note that I was impressed by the communication skills of Ms. Ray Gore. We often hear that we can communicate better. And I also think that something we want to be looking for on the school committee is trying to have a balance of talents and what's going to add to the committee as a whole. And also I appreciated Mr. Oji's discussion about the opportunity gap and his focus on racial issues and how we can help marginalized communities. It was very clear to me that he has been researching these issues deeply, that he's been paying very close attention to what takes place at the school committee level as well as in the schools. But when I combine all the factors together and also hear the input from the joint board, I would be moving in the direction of Ms. Frias. All right, Ms. Monopoly or Ms. Charlevsky, would you like to go?
Jennifer, I can let you go. I think, you know, the writing's pretty clear on the wall here, which I don't have a problem with. Let's put it that way. I think we have, you know, 5 very qualified candidates. We have probably 3 who have, you know, done some work in Brookline. And for me, I certainly appreciated Nancy Ray Gore's communications background. I think that is important. And I think there are ways of contributing that in other ways. But I do take seriously that this is not an entry-level position in many ways, and that we have a lot going on and not a lot of bandwidth right now. So, you know, I mean, if we want to take the vote tonight, I'll be ready to vote for Val. I also want to compliment, you know, Dr. Hermos and Dr. Kutcher. I know Dr. Kutcher personally, and he's a great guy and would be valuable too. But I do take seriously the issue of, you know, being able to start right away and not have to catch up on knowing what Brookline is like today. So, and I want to thank everybody who applied. It's not easy to apply. It's not easy to run. It's even harder to run. So that's my point. I feel bad though that Suzanne won't be here to vote.
If it's any consolation, Helen, Suzanne mentioned to me that if we could finish this today, that she would endorse that.
Okay, perfect.
So is the plan to actually vote tonight then?
I think given this discussion, it's pretty clear who is the first choice of the majority. Just in the notes that I've taken down, there were 10 of us who at least had Ms. Frias on our list, might have been more than that. And of those 10, almost everyone stated her as a first choice. Mr. Van Squag?
Yes, forgive me. I just want to take a very brief moment here to acknowledge one person who I should have acknowledged more than I did. Jerry Kutcher, just as I mentioned that John Hermos and I served years ago, Jerry Kutcher and I served years ago on the Brookline Community Mental Health Center board. And everything you saw tonight from Jerry Kutcher is what Brookline saw, you know, when he and I served together on that board, and for many, many years that he has served the town at town meeting as well. So it was equally great to see him and to see John. I wanted to ask John if he, you know, had an interest in recommending a exchange program for the high school students involving Nicaragua or some of the other countries that he has taken an interest in over the years. This is a terrific group of people that we heard from tonight. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, would anyone else like to speak? All right, go ahead, Ms. Monopoly.
I haven't spoken yet, so I will add a few thoughts, although I prefer more time to reflect. It's a really interesting pool of candidates, and I really appreciate everyone putting their name in for this position. It's a tough job that people volunteer their time to do. Although I will consider myself someone who came in at entry level on some levels. I'm a parent and an educator, so maybe not so much, but entering into town politics in Brookline is not for the faint of heart. And it is good to run a campaign. I think that's really helpful. You know, people, I think that the candidates brought some really different strengths, each one of them. I really was excited about Nancy Ray Gore was talking. She's really positive energy. And I really love the focus on communication skills, because I think it's something that we as a town, in particular school committee, really can focus on. And I think that's really important. And I also, although I heard some communication tonight that made me a little bit uncomfortable, a little maybe perhaps banter that I thought wasn't as productive. I thought that, you know, it is important to stand up to say what you mean, and to, I felt like she was strong in her ideas and wasn't afraid to say what she thought. So I thought that was really important. Two-way communication is really important. I also was interested in, and I hope that if Gerald Kutcher can volunteer some of his social emotional ideas and support to our school community, that would be fantastic, because we have a school community coming back in a pandemic, or hopefully the tail end of a pandemic. And we really need to think about what those needs are for our students. And Wadner Oji was so passionate and really talked about equality and budgets as a value statement and a voice of reason, which I thought were things that really stood out for me. You know, and Val's run a campaign and just brings a lot of strengths as well, and a lot of background, and is a great candidate, and clearly has a lot of support. So I appreciate hearing all of the, are we a joint convention? I appreciate hearing the joint convention's perspectives on it. So it was very helpful to hear everyone speak about what they thought was important. Thanks, David.
All right, thank you. Any more thoughts from anyone? So it looks to me, go ahead, Mr. Green.
Yeah, you know, after each one of these interview sessions, you know, we get a lot of new information, a lot of new ideas. I hope someone on the school committee has taken notes and follows up with some of the candidates who we don't select to see if they'd be willing to help us with some of the issues that they have raised. Mr. Osh, for example, you know, maybe, you know, he can really do a deep dive into this issue of achievement levels by certain students. You know, the communications issues and things like that. So I mean, it takes more than just saying that. Someone has to really commit to following up on taking advantage of the resources that these candidates present to us or could offer us.
All right, would anyone else like to speak? Okay, well, it seems to me, given this discussion, we have a clear front runner. So I would think we could go ahead and move on and vote tonight. I see a head nods from a few of you. So would someone like to make a motion? All right, Ms. Wolf-Dickoff.
I move that we vote to appoint Val Frias as the interim school committee member for the duration of the seat, which is through May of next year.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Dr. Ashkenazi seconds. So we'll go in order. I'll start with the school committee. Dr. Liu.
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly.
I'm abstaining.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff.
Yes.
Ms. Charlevsky.
Yes.
Dr. Ehrenberg.
Yes.
Ms. Nobrega.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Moving on to the select board, Dr. Ashkenazi.
Yes.
Ms. Hamilton.
Yes.
Dr. Fernandez.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Van Scoyoc.
Yes.
So by a vote of 11-0 to 1, welcome aboard, Miss Frias.
Yay. Remember to get signed in with the town clerk.
Yes. Go to the town clerk to formally be sworn in. Ms. Monopoly, you want to speak? Go ahead.
Whenever I abstain, I'd like to make a statement. And so my statement is not that I am not supportive of Val, and I look forward to working with her. I'm very excited about her candidacy. I've spoken with her, when she was running, and I'm very excited about her candidacy. I just like more time, but I respect the joint convention's wish and desire and overwhelming majority to go ahead and vote. And so I just wanted to Val, let you know that I'm very excited to work with you.
I very much look forward to work with you as well, Val. Thank you for running again a second time. I'm glad you're going to be able to join us. And I want to thank all 5 candidates. Each one of you are outstanding in different ways. You have a lot to contribute. I look forward to your contributions to our town governance. And just because it didn't work out this time doesn't mean it might not work out some other time or in some other capacity. So please stay involved, all of you. You're what helped make Brookline such a great community. Now at this point, go ahead, Ms. Hamilton.
I believe that I need to adjourn the select board from this convention.
Before we do that, though, we actually have to have a vote to dissolve the convention.
Okay.
So if someone has a motion to dissolve the joint convention. Okay, Ms. Nobrega, do we have a second? Ms. Monopoly. All right, so I'll start with the school committee members. Dr. Liu?
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly?
Yes.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff?
Yes.
Ms. Charlevsky?
Yes.
Dr. Ehrenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Nobrega?
Yes.
I also vote yes. Dr. Ashkenazi?
Yes.
Ms. Hamilton?
Yes.
Dr. Fernandez?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Van Scoyac?
Yes.
All right, the joint convention is hereby dissolved. Thank you very much, members of the select board, for coming. Go ahead, Ms. Hamilton.
I move to adjourn this portion of the joint convention, and the select board will leave the meeting. All those in favor? Bernard,
Yes.
Raul,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Miriam,
Yes.
and the chair and Heather votes yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Now,
Yeah, great meeting.
select board, you are welcome to stay if you so choose, but we still have some more school committee business to tend to.
And you even have a Wednesday night free.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so next up on our agenda for this evening is administrative business, the consent agenda. Do any of these items require further explanation, or would anyone like to talk about them, or are we ready to vote? Okay, looks like no one wants to talk about the consent agenda. That's fine. Someone like to move the consent agenda?
I'll move it. Oh, Susan, I'll let you do it. I can second.
Ellen seconds. All right, Dr. Liu. Well, we can switch back to first names. I was doing that to make the select board happy.
But they use first names.
Yeah, and they said yes instead of I. What a disappointment.
I just remembered last year when we did this, a couple of them got very upset that we were using first names. How informal of you. So I wanted to make them happy. All right, Andy?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Okay, next up we have new business. Does anyone have some new business? Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so Susan and I would like to introduce some new business coming out of Panel 4. So Panel 4 has continued to meet over the summer to discuss possible recommendations for reopening in the fall. And at last Friday's meeting, they seem to be coming to consensus about a set of draft recommendations. on some very important topics, including masking and distancing. And so even though these haven't been voted on yet formally by the panel, it seemed like a good time for the school committee and the superintendent and senior staff to start discussing them, because some of the recommendations have really important implications for how we set up our classrooms, how teachers plan their lessons, and how principals schedule their buildings. So Susan, do you have anything to add to that before we maybe introduce Dave, who can talk us through some of the recommendations?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So I think, in the, there was sort of a foundational question of sort of whose decision is this? And I think over the course of the past year, we had, so I think it's important for us to discuss that as well. Over the course of the past year, the school committee has, and the superintendent has heard from panel 4, and then typically the superintendent has either come with a recommendation or we kind of discuss it and the superintendent goes forward. I'm not certain we need to formally vote something like this. I don't think we have in the past, but I do think that given the timeline, especially if we're not meeting on Wednesday, given the timeline of some of the decisions and the fact that not only the superintendent, but the deputy superintendent for administration and finance and the operations team and everyone's going to have to make some decisions and spend some money one way or the other. It's probably important to not only hear from panel 4, but end tonight, if not with, with somehow releasing the administration to take action without us having to come back and vote if that's at all possible, just because things are going to start moving quickly because the summers, it's July 26th for some of us, but as everyone knows, school starts for admin central office sometime in the second week of August. So I just want to make sure we give them the flexibility that they might need. So anyway, that's the only thing I would say, just from a procedural point of view, is we should just figure out to what extent we can do that, because they obviously need to have some discussions on their own, and I don't want the bottom line is I don't want the school committee to be sort of a roadblock in this, if that's at all possible. The only other thing I would say, though, is that the guidance is changing frequently, especially as the Delta variant sort of evolves. And so that kind of cuts the other way, which is because the guidance is changing, there's sort of an inclination to kind of wait and see till we have more information. And so again, just on that, I'm very sympathetic to that as well. That came up in the panel 4 discussion, but I still want to make sure that we give central office the timeline it needs so that it isn't scrambling at the last minute to do things. So I think those would be the only prefatory things I would say. But Andy, what else did we talk about in advance?
Well, I checked in with Suzanne, our chair, who's not here, about her view about whose decision it is, and in her view, it's a decision to be made by the superintendent with the blessing of the school committee. So, not that the superintendent has to make his decision on the spot right now, but I think the committee should discuss it enough to give him a sense of what we could support.
Sorry, Andy, what are we discussing?
Yeah, now we get to the meat of it. I think maybe Dave, do you want to present the actual recommendations as they stand right now?
All right, go ahead, Dave.
Hi, everybody. I'd be happy to. Dave Gayshock, Heath Parent and co-chair of Advisory Panel 4. I want to stress what Andy and Susan already mentioned. These are not final formally voted recommendations. They're more a sense of growing consensus on the panel over the last 2 meetings we've had since the end of school. I expect that consensus will continue to grow based on what I've heard from others, but obviously subject to continuing to watch what we see in terms of both continuing evidence coming in as well as community rates, and as more is learned about the Delta variant and how it impacts vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals. So I think the general sense, to summarize it right now, is first thing Panel 4 wants to endorse, is likely to endorse and stress, is that both the CDC guidance and the American Academy of Pediatrics guidance, along with what's come out so far from state authorities, are all pointing towards complete in-person operation is appropriate this year, and we're talking about how to make that appropriately low risk for everybody. while meeting, allowing people to meet the objectives and have as much flexibility as they can. Within that parameter, vaccination is the #1. Continue to promote as much as possible. Happy to help support any discussions that the district wants to have around whether and at what point vaccination might be mandatory for any groups of stakeholders, or might be that vaccination status might trigger requirement or lack of requirement to take other precautions. But just everybody, please, please, please get vaccinated if you're eligible and not vaccinated yet. Probably the biggest points of planning are masks and distancing. So I'll go to those last and just hit quickly. Ventilation, I think our emerging consensus is keep doing what we're doing. Keep up the program that PSB developed over the course of last year and had going by the end of the year. In terms of symptom screening, stay home when sick, same things, keep up what we're doing from the end of last year. In terms of masks, I think there's general consensus growing on panel 4 that outdoor masking should remain not required, can be encouraged when particularly unvaccinated students or staff are spending extended time in close quarters, but it doesn't need to be required or policed as of where things stand now. Indoors, there's general consensus, I think, on panel 4 for the moment, that at least for up to 6th grade students who are basically tracked to the grade levels for which vaccination is not available yet by age eligibility, that PSB, we would recommend have a universal masking requirement in place rather than trying to work from individual vaccination status for those grades. This is speaking of students, not necessarily adults yet, because the adults who teach and otherwise support those grades obviously are by and large vaccination eligible. We still we've not arrived, I think we've not discussed enough yet to have a consensus view of to what extent masking should be required in our view for grades 7 and 8 in the middle schools, or grades 9 to 12 at the high school, or for staff. We'll have that back on our agenda in a week and a half. And then distancing, which is tied a bit to masks in this context. One point of consensus that I think arrived at on Friday is that in a fully masked classroom environment, so in our recommendation, anything up through 6th grade, for example, that we should give educators the freedom to organize the seating and structure and physical positioning of their classroom as they deem appropriate. So if we're going to have a fully masked classroom, we would, for the moment, based on what's known and expected, not recommend that PSB spend a lot of cycles worrying about interseat distancing or keeping people facing in a particular direction or otherwise. The panel members who were there on Friday were, I think, generally of the view that in a fully masked classroom, perfectly okay if the teacher wants to go back to multi-student tables as seating arrangements, or to have desks configured in a way that students are not all facing the same direction. So we'll circle back to testing in some more depth, and we also have to circle back to contact tracing and quarantine. But I think one thing to stress on testing is there seems to be, our testing leads in particular are of the view that routine asymptomatic screening, testing of whole populations, we want to stress, not necessary to maintain a safe school environment. There may be some benefit of some limited amount of that for limited periods of time or targeted places for reassurance purposes. But our testing priority, again, subject to some further refinement, is likely to be focus the testing resources we have on quickly and accurately categorizing symptomatic individuals into COVID positive versus COVID negative, and potentially even more nuanced groups than that. So that's the quick overall summary, but happy to take questions that folks have.
Dave, did you mention the cafeteria seating? Or
Oh, I'm
The
sorry, Andy.
minimus,
Thanks for
that's a key one because it affects a lot
Yep.
of scheduling.
thanks for reminding me. So in terms of for lunch times or other meal times, the building consensus on the panel seems to be obviously do as much of that outside as we feasibly can, just like we did last year, understanding that's going to be a limited amount. Maximize, especially when indoors, maximize physical distance when eating, therefore unmasked to the extent feasible. But that's a big caveat because everybody, the consensus of the group that was there Friday was that if needed for operational purposes, it's okay in our view to use up to full cafeteria capacity, and not worry about having a minimum interseat distance for students. In those cases, we would suggest that classrooms maintain assigned tables to make contact tracing needed to facilitate that. Don't necessarily worry about which student's sitting at which seat at the table. But it would be good to be able to, for the nurses' sake who were doing the contact tracing, to be able to have a sense of who was sitting at the table with a particular person at a particular day. And then just limit time as much as, unmasked time as much as reasonably feasible while still allowing for a healthy, eating period. So, but I think that the headline message there is the panel members who were part of the discussion on Friday were all of the view that that it's not, that distancing during lunchtime is not so important that PSB needs to structure lunch across multiple spaces in classrooms and otherwise, if that's difficult to accomplish, which we know it is.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm sorry, could you just talk for a minute more about maybe some of the discussion, Dave, around the rationale around why it would be okay for unmasked eating in close proximity, but we should have masks in the classroom? Is it like a length of time piece? I mean, we just, having not gone to the panel 4 meeting, would just be helpful for me to have a little bit of the context for that kind of piece about why unmasked eating is okay in that close proximity without spacing, but we should have masks in classrooms. Do you have any sort of feedback for me on that?
Yep, good, great question. I think that the key difference, so let's talk about pre-K through 6 right now, when we're since the panel for the moment is going to be recommending universal masking indoors with this one exception. And I think the reason for the exception is because of limited time, for one, and also just in service of the broader, the folks may have seen in the American Academy of Pediatrics guidance, as well as much of the CDC's guidance was structured on this too, which really put making full in-person school operations the primary goal for all kinds of reasons, socio-emotional, mental health, developmental and otherwise, with a lot of the other recommendations like distancing being a kind of as much as feasible subject to goal number 1. And I think that that's a big part of what is also driving this, that we understand that a minimum distance recommendation around eating times is a very, very difficult logistical recommendation for the system to implement with full cohorts back full time. And we're just, I think folks are not convinced that there's enough of a benefit shown by the evidence that's available for that time to make all of that logistical difficulty needed in this context.
Dave, has there been any consideration for the, while students are eating, to have students not face each other? So be in rows where they're facing the backs of other students?
Not specifically, although I think the general sense that I think we have been, even as last year and went through the spring, less and less concerned about direction of seating as an issue. there certainly is some possibility that direction makes a difference when you're talking about large droplet based, so cough, sneeze, spit based transmission. Given how much of transmission is believed to be aerosolized and therefore more diffuse as opposed to short range, ventilation is really doing that work as opposed to direction of seating. So I think my sense is the panel would categorize that as a sure, if all else equal, that can't hurt. It's kind of a nice to have, not something that we would recommend that the district move a lot of logistical mountains over.
All right, and another question I have, and maybe this would be more for Dr. Guillory, but for anyone really, would be if the recommendation is going to be for preschool up through grade 6, how would we be able to differentiate in common areas if a student is in 7th grade versus 6th grade? Obviously, some teachers will know them, but not everybody in the building is going to have that awareness.
And can I just clarify one thing before Dr. Guillory jumps in, which is it may be the case that the panel ultimately recommends universal masking through 8th grade or even through 12th grade. We just haven't we haven't nailed down the latter part yet. So I don't want to give the impression that we've decided that no masks are required at those grades.
Go ahead, Mariah.
Has panel 4, thanks, David. Has panel 4, both Davids, thank you. Has panel 4 talked about the trade-off between masking and equitable participation of students who are hard of hearing, English language learners, have difficulty understanding tone from voice or from not seeing full face, facial expressions, etc. And is my first question. And then part B to that is, if so, what was the discussion about that trade-off? And then my second question is there any, and this is complicated, is there any sort of modeling that can be done as we look at prevalence of people who are, who struggle with being masked or having others around them masked versus the prevalence of COVID in the community, and at what point there's a tipping point and it makes more sense to have people masked versus the disproportionate benefit to people who tremendously benefit by having people unmasked. Does that make sense, Dave?
It absolutely makes sense.
Okay.
It's probably $1 million, if not billion or $1 trillion question for.
But we have panel 4, so I feel like
country or the
anything's
world.
possible.
So yes, there has been some discussion of that. I suspect there will be more. I want to stress that all of these recommendations are kind of being pitched, or aimed at, this is what folks are thinking makes sense as the start of the school year, which may be very different than what, there may be some very good basis for this to be, that recommendation to be different in November or certainly January or March than it is in September. So with that said, I think we need some more ongoing discussion, probably some more information to help quantify that exact trade-off. I suspect, based upon what I have heard so far about panel members' viewpoints on the subject, that there probably would be some openness to the idea of making individual accommodation, obviously, exceptions. We haven't talked about a broader tipping point about when, whether to go away from a mask, requirement recommendation from our perspective, because the balance plays out that way. I think that my guess is that calculus probably changes when we have vaccination levels, age eligibility drop, or once, if the Delta surge that's started now in kind of all age groups reverses. But we certainly can do more work and thinking on that. My sense is that there is enough there's the thinking of the panel is I think at the moment driven by those two factors I mentioned, and also the fact that there are going to be a number of whether strictly physically, medically vulnerable students, or students who may not be, have a specific diagnosis that makes them vulnerable, but who, for whatever personal or family or other household reason, were part of RLA this past year, that will no longer have that option available to them, and coming back into an environment under grade 7 or so, where very few of the people in the room are presumptively vaccinated, and also where masks are optional or otherwise would be a very, very big leap. It'd be basically changing a lot of our controls at once, as opposed to taking a more incremental approach. So I think that was primarily the rationale behind where our recommendations are firming up.
All right, I see you want to speak, Susan, but Dr. Guillory had his hand up a while ago. Dr. Guillory, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to comment on a question you had initially asked, but David indicated that that decision was still pending. So okay. I'm all set.
All right, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, so as always, Dave, thank you. Thank you to panel 4 for all of this good fodder. I would just raise 3 issues for us to keep in mind as the discussion plays out. One is the issue of stigmatization and stigmatizing students. Some parents are going to choose not to vaccinate their children, which we may or may not agree with, but we certainly do not want the child in that situation to be stigmatized or harmed in our schools. Also, there will be some who cannot be vaccinated for other reasons, and there are obviously privacy and health issues that for reasons that they cannot be vaccinated. And so anything that sounded like it was going to ask only unvaccinated, something that said unvaccinated, you had to wear a mask, and vaccinated, you could not wear a mask. That was, people were really, I think it's just quite mindful of that. I know a number of people on the committee feel strongly about that as well. I think the second thing is that and we heard really beautifully from a couple of our educators and one of our principals about just making sure that this was implementable. And so just to the question of, would someone know that someone was the 7th grader in a common area? Certainly that is why the notion of 7 through 8 and 9 through 12 are 2 different questions because of that K-8 environment. And so just being mindful, I think that's a place where the superintendent and the principals can really have a good conversation about what it means to try to manage their building. We did have an educator who was there who, again, quite eloquent, said, look, I can't I'm keeping track of so many things. I cannot keep track of this as well. I've got, so many other things going on. So just something that's implementable. And if it means we have to veer a little bit more, what's the word? A little bit more conservative for everyone, then let's do that. And let's, keep that. And the third thing is that on testing, there was a pretty strong sentiment, and I just want to reflect it from, and David said it, I just want to underscore it, from pretty much everyone involved in the heroic lift that was asymptomatic testing this past year, that they need to see a lot of information to cause them to start that back up again. It doesn't mean no, never, but Tricia Laham, the nurses, Neera Pollock, Jenny Tam, myself to some extent, just it was such a lift, and it was such an enormous amount of time from our nurses. What we really heard last spring was that our nurses have a lot of other things that they need to be doing as part of their jobs. And there's a real opportunity cost to having asymptomatic testing. We also heard from Dr. Linus earlier in the year that asymptomatic testing basically would have 2 functions. It's very expensive, and DESE was subsidizing it before, but even with the subsidy, it was taking a lot of effort. But it basically has 2 functions. If you're doing absolutely everybody, then right? You know, one way or another, whether or not there's, asymptomatic issues in the building. Or if you're doing just a representative sample, then it's not opt-in. You're actually choosing to make sure you're getting a representative sample of 5% or 10% or whatever it is, in which case it's not really opt-in, that people have to get tested if they're in that, because you can't have sample bias. So for a whole variety of reasons, people really thought that the focus had to be on, first and foremost, vaccinations. And if anything, maybe we can get one of our prior candidates, if they're quite interested in communication, to help with the vaccination campaign, because that is obviously one of the biggest things that we are facing as a town and as a country right now. But certainly in terms of health, Panel 4 was very clear that that was first and foremost the top priority, but then also rapid screening, because David alluded to this, but because once we're in closer quarters, we're going to have a lot more close contacts. So having a much better rapid screening of close contact and a way to get kids tested and then back in the building so that they're not out for 3-4 days while they wait for an appointment at CVS or whatever, to some mechanism for that in the buildings or elsewhere. To be able to one place in town. I think that was, people were far more interested in that, both operationally and just from a public health perspective. So I'll stop there. There were a few other things, but just underneath every one of these, there were just some values choices as well, and some nuances about like, where do we put relative effort. So anyway, thank you, David. Thank you, Panel 4, for all of that, and for the future conversations as well.
Absolutely.
And David, if I got any of that wrong, please correct me.
Sounded accurate to me.
All right, any other thoughts or questions? So Dr. Guillory, what is it that you would be looking for us as a school? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Helen.
I'm sorry, I do have one question, took me a minute. Do we have a sense of the numbers or percentages of students 12 and older, and percentages of teachers, staff, who are vaccinated?
So the most recent data that we heard at Panel 4 that was PSB specific was from near the end of the school year. And my recollection, I'll have to go back and double check, but my recollection of what Tricia Laham reported then was that we had seen quite strong uptake of vaccinations in our age eligible cohorts, up to the point of, I think she was talking about the high school student population at that point being 70 or 75% vaccinated was the range I believe that she was quoting, but put an asterisk there to double check. That would be consistent with Brookline vaccination rates as a whole, contrary to what anyone might be reading in sadly official DPH reporting, but in any of the news media as well. Brookline's overall vaccination rate among all people, so this takes into account the fact that 15% or so of our population is not age eligible yet. 70 or so % of our population is probably fully vaccinated at this point, another 6% or so partially vaccinated. So when and then of that remaining 25 to 30%, half of it is not age eligible yet. So of our age eligible populations, we're in the mid 80s probably right now. And that's, so all that's directionally consistent, I think, but that's about where we are.
So that's great. That's fantastic. And given, at what point does the panel think, at what percentage do we need to get to that there's enough herd immunity that we don't need to, or do they even talk about that the kids won't need to wear masks, or that, I mean, part of it is also the staff. And I don't know if do we have those statistics? No. Okay.
I don't think we do.
No, and I think that's something where this came up a number of times, but I think this is probably a conversation for the superintendent to have with other superintendents and with the commissioner, just in terms of and the BEU leadership about whether or not that is something that the BEU is interested in. There are certainly members of the BEU who have expressed that they would like to know what percentage of their colleagues are vaccinated, but also, as we all know, there are privacy issues and all sorts of other things. So at any rate, that's probably just more of a bigger policy question on the adult.
But there's no
adult
privacy issues that people tell us.
I think it's an issue of conversation with maybe the BEU.
Yeah, no, I agree with
to
you.
see whether they're interested in letting the teachers tell us.
Right. So, but did they have anything to say about herd immunity? Or?
No, I don't think we have. Certainly, there is a point at which there are enough vaccinated people that we've got to, unvaccinated folks who are still vulnerable are few and far enough between that we've significantly reduced that risk. I don't think we don't have a definitive percentage on that yet, and I think that that's probably what's going to drive some of the subsequent conversation around recommendations for 7 and 8, 9 to 12, and staff in the coming meetings. And it's also going to be influenced by the fact that got to keep watching and seeing how Delta changes dynamics, and also the fact that that a lot of our 7 and 8 and 9 to 12 students, as well as staff members, may have age 11 and below household members at home that we need to be thinking of secondarily as well.
Right.
For the moment, that's going to change over the course of the school year.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts from school committee members? Okay, so a question I had for you, Dr. Guillory. It's very clear we're going to need another school committee meeting in order to vote on whatever it is that your recommendation will be, which I understand is in part going to be based on panel 4's recommendation. So I'm just wondering how you see the timeline moving forward and when you think roughly you would like for us to get back together as a committee to vote on a policy. Or if you even think that's
Susan, do you want to restate? So I'm extending that option as a need, but I think what's in front of us right now is given that there isn't another school committee, I think until late August, the ask would be to give the school department some latitude in terms of making some purchases around PPE, those early expenditures right now, given that costs are generally down. And I think given all of the aspects that were discussed tonight, as soon as everyone else jumps on the bandwagon to start making purchases, supplies will get limited, those types of things, and it may be harder to get the closer we get to the start of school. So I think some of just that latitude right now, we don't have the specifics. I think we're in the process of gathering some quotes initially. And then as soon as practical, certainly the reopening guidance, we need to make some determinations around that. We're happy to take that on, but I also understand the need to have the dialogue or the discussion. But as soon as panel 4 is ready with those recommendations, the school department will be ready to act and to respond in a way such that, as we've all talked about communication tonight, it will be imperative for our families to be aware, certainly our staff, to make sure that they're aware of the direction that we're headed for September as well. Did I miss any, Susan? And
well, do you think that we need to how much clarity do we need to reach tonight about the elimination of minimum distancing requirements in classrooms and in cafeterias? Those two things have really big operational implications for teaching and learning, as well as for facilities.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, the exact same thing. So I think there are some places, just to sort of back up on the list of things. So for ventilation, it did sound like there were some purchases that needed to be made and some upgrades. And Matt Gillis sounded like he was on top of that, some additional filters and some additional things. And so I'm not sure we need to say anything except say thank you on that one. Hand washing, the protocols are not going to change, and so they haven't changed. There's no recommendation for them to change. So just to the superintendent's point, for that one, I think whatever expenditures are needed on that to maintain what was the status quo last year, that seems uncontroversial. And I would say the same thing is true about the sanitizing. So we kind of took a step down in terms of the sanitizing specifically, just because the guidance changed on that. So what I heard Dave Gayshak, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, is that we should kind of on sanitizing go back to where we were at the end of last year, but that was not the high level, but where we ended the last year, and that seemed pretty much the direction that Matt was going to go in anyway. So I think for those things, there was just some things that seemed fairly straightforward. Then there was a set of things that I would say we don't actually have to decide right this minute, which is the masking policy for students, for example, or some of these more complex issues about the BEU. Those are things that I think we can watch them play out. We can wait for panel 4. The superintendent can have some conversations with his peers and with the BEU, but I don't think we need to make a decision on those things right now. I think they're very important, but are we going to ask about vaccination status? Are we going to require vaccinations, that sort of thing? I don't think that, but I do think the one thing just that is worth maybe weighing in on is the distancing piece, because that not only impacts a lot of physical sort of setup of the buildings, but also scheduling. Again, one of the principals was quite clear that if we were going to start messing with that was going to be a pretty big lift for all of them. And so just to, clarity as quickly as possible would be important. So if we were going to go back to 6-foot distancing, or if we were going to go back to, that sort of thing. So I think that's the one piece that operationally did seem important. Even, when Matt asked panel 4 some very, I would say, helpful questions, things like, okay, well, we have these tables where there are 8 kids around a table, if they're the little kids, right? If they're masked, but frankly, it's only, a couple feet from one student to another student, and maybe, a few feet across the table. How comfortable are you with that? And to Dave Gayshak's point, I think the group was fairly comfortable with that, as long as it was masked. So, it seems to me that is the one thing that's going to have both operational implications, cost implications, schedule implications, that if people have a really different perspective on, we should have a conversation about. But the rest, I think, and others should weigh in, but Andy, Dave, Linus, I think the rest was fairly straightforward at this moment in time.
So at this point, you don't see a need for any formal vote this evening?
I guess what I would just say is if people have a very different perspective on that last one, or if people have a very different perspective on anything that I said, speak up, because it did seem like those were places where there was a lot of consensus on panel 4. And the places where there weren't consensus on panel 4, it didn't seem to me that those had to get discussed tonight. So I guess what I would say is if we can all kind of nod along with the things that panel 4 did have a consensus on, then we're probably fine. If we have to have discussion about them, then those are the things that would have a time implication. Does that make sense?
Yes. Dr. Gallery, go ahead.
And I think to those points, just to reiterate one more time, that the lead time that school operations will need to adjust and adapt, that symbolic head nod is crucial for their planning.
All right, so are members comfortable with moving in this direction in the areas where panel 4 reached consensus? All right, it's a lot of head nods. So I guess we're all set on that portion. Any final thoughts from anyone on this subject?
I just have a question. I'm almost scared. I almost don't want to ask this. Is panel 4 going to continue indefinitely? Is there like a renewed mandate for panel 4?
So
I just want to know to what extent we're going to be able to continue to draw from panel 4's expertise, because presumably there's going to be a lot of decision making around this.
It's the
I
Hotel
was hesitant because I
California.
don't want to scare you
We
away.
haven't told them this, but it's the Hotel California. So don't tell them. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. So yes, the answer is yes. They're all good sports, and they do seem to be willing to continue to serve. Dave did put out, I noticed it was maybe 90% of the way through the meeting. He's like, if anybody feels like they need to change their commitment, let me know. And then he like kept going, just rolled right past it. So I don't think, people didn't actually exercise their escape hatch. But it is worth thinking about. One of the things that we did need to do this summer overall is just think a little bit about all 4 of the panels, and were there things that we needed from them. Panel 4 is probably the clearest, but at any rate, the short answer is, my sense is, David, unless you have a different sense, that people are very much willing to continue to serve until unimpaneled. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I think our goal is to not make it a weekly pace this year if we can help it. But yes, with that caveat, I think that's fair.
Well, thanks for advising us, Dave.
Absolutely.
The only other thing I would say that came up a number of times, and this is more for the superintendent than anything else, is that, since there is not, even the language people got a little tripped up on, since there is not a remote option, kind of a remote only option, and I think we probably do need to stick with that wording just for a whole bunch of reasons. It is certainly true that there are still going to be students who are going to be quarantined for 2 weeks, or maybe a whole bunch of close contacts who are going to be quarantined for 2 weeks. Or there might be an immunocompromised situation in their home. Whatever it is, we somehow need to come up with an answer for the public, for the parents, for the students, for the, with the teachers, about how education will continue in those situations. I think what won't work is giving them, 2 weeks of asynchronous work or something like that. So I think we probably do need a fairly good answer for that the teachers are part of that answer creation process, and because they're going to have to be implementing it. So that one is not a panel 4 issue, but it's just something that I think we're all gonna have to have a good answer on, especially since RLA is not, we don't have a remote option at this point. So I'll just leave that in the superintendent's. I'll just throw that over the transit to the 5th floor.
One thing that I will add to that is that I think panel 4 will continue to be attuned to and try to encourage updating of guidance around under what circumstances a student or staff member does need to quarantine and for how long. We saw some progress on that over the course of the year as more data became available, and hopefully we'll continue to see such progress, but we'll obviously try to follow the evidence where it leads. There's going to be, over time, some more allowance for fully vaccinated individuals are currently treated differently for close contact purposes under state guidance for quarantine than non-vaccinated individuals are. And so there will be some nuance like that we will try to, help PSB stay up on and try to minimize that burden where there is a good, scientific basis to support that.
Andy?
Yeah, so before we leave this all together, I have one little remark for Linus. So when you do get to the point of sort of figuring out the details of the masking policy, like the PSB had a masking policy last year. It was part of our policy manual, and it was written very, very carefully. We put a lot of thought into it. It wasn't taken off the shelf, and it kind of spells out what the exceptions would be. And so, not that so we took that off the books at the end of the school year in order to give the superintendent discretion about what to do next. But if you're looking to see what we did last year, like a lot of thought went into that. So you could just call up the old policy and take a look.
All right, any other thoughts? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Dave, for all the hard work you and panel 4 are doing to assist us. And we'll definitely be continuing in touch. All right, thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you, Gal. Have a good evening.
Is there any other new business? All right, seeing none, we are ready to move into executive session. So is there a motion to meet an executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A for the following purpose? Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, Unit A, Unit B, and paraprofessionals. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining and litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. And purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from the following meetings: June 14th, 2021, June 22nd, 2021, and June 30, 2021. So do we have a second to that motion to go into executive session? Andy seconds. Andy?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Eden?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. We will not be returning to open session afterwards. We have a separate link, so see everyone there.